Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, and the link for the direct contact for me so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition to that, I want to take a minute just to ask you if you enjoy the content, if you are finding value, to hit all the buttons down below, the like, the share, the subscribe button, but also the brand new button called Hype. It is a free opportunity once a day for you to hype a channel that you find value in. And so if you find value in this video, I would ask you to hit the Hype button for me, and the channel will greatly appreciate it. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the Mysterium Coniunctionis with Chapter 4, Part 3, The Transformation of the King. This should be just one chapter today, or in this video. As the Egyptian mystique of kingship shows, the king, like every archetype, is not just a static image. He signifies the dynamic process whereby the human carrier of the mystery is included in the mysterious drama of God's incarnation. This happened at the birth of Pharaoh, at his coronation. Footnote 30. Colin Campbell, The Miraculous Birth of King Amenhotep III. The coronation, which bestowed on the divine being, the king, the two crowns of Egypt, advanced him a step further than birth in the divine scale of life. It is important to note that that was not an actual thing. That was only the perception of it, was people's understanding. There was no point at which it was divine right that anyone should rule another person. That doesn't mean that they were bad rulers, necessarily, but nobody was born to leadership just because of who they were. That was a complete misunderstanding for a lot of human history. We have found here in our experiment in freedom that there is a better way to go about doing that. At his coronation, at the Hepset festival during his reign, and at his death. The text and illustrations of the birth chamber in the temple depict the divine procreation and birth of Pharaoh in the form of the mystic marriage of the Queen Mother and the Father God. The Hepset festival served to associate his Ka with the cultivation of the soil and, presumably, to preserve or strengthen his powers. Footnote 31. Ibid. The anniversary of the coronation seems to have been held as a said festival when the king was regarded as Osiris on earth. The king is not dancing or striding in the presence of his Osiris self as if worshipping. No, the striding is a movement in the ceremony preparatory to his taking possession of the throne, which marks his complete Osirification, the last act of the said festival. Breasted, Development of Religion and Thought in Ancient Egypt, says of the said festival, one of the ceremonies of this feast symbolized the resurrection of Osiris, and it was possibly to associate the pharaoh with this auspicious event that he assumed the role of Osiris. On the significance of the said festival, Fraser, the Golden Bough, says, the intention of the festival seems to have been to procure for the king a new lease of life, a renovation for his divine energies, a rejuvenescence. One of the inscriptions at Abydos runs, thou dost begin to renew thyself. To thee it is granted to blossom forth again like the young moon god. Thou dost grow young again. Thou art reborn in the renewal of the said festival. The said festival was held every 30 years, probably in connection with the quarters of the 120-year Cyrus-Isis period. This festival, it should be noted, was also connected with the ceremony for making the fields fruitful. The king circumambulated a marked-off field 4 times, accompanied by the Apis bull. Similar ceremonies are still performed today. Amenophis IV caused the Aton, the symbol of his religious reformation, to be introduced at his said festival. The identity of his Ha with the Father God was finally confirmed at his death and sealed for all time. The transformation of the king from an imperfect state into a perfect whole, an incorruptible essence, is portrayed in a similar manner in Alchemy. It describes either his procreation and birth, in the form of the hierogasmos, or else his imperfect initial state and his subsequent rebirth in perfect form. In what follows, I shall give a few examples of this transformation. Among the older medieval treatises, there is the so-called Allegoria Merlini. So far as the name Merlinus is concerned, I must leave it an open question whether this refers to the magician Merlin or is a corruption of Miraculous. 33 and 34. 33. The name Anus, which occasionally occurs, and which one might connect with the king of the same name in the Grail legend, is a corruption of Horus. It is important to note that this is a word that we now have. It is possible that the source of the Allegoria Merlini is the Prophetia Merlini, which is well known in the Middle Ages. Geoffrey of Monmouth, History of the Kings of Britain. 34. The verses of a certain Miraculous are preserved in the Rosarian Philosophia Artica Arithmeticus. And back to the text. I don't know that it matters at all which one it is. The allegory tells us of a certain king who made ready for battle. He was about to mount his horse. He wished for a drink of water. A servant asked him what water he would like, and the king answered, I demand the water which is closest to my heart and which likes me above all things. Oh, well, that came from the Bible. Right? This was, it was David, wasn't it? Maybe it was Saul, but I think it was David where they wanted this one specific, when I say came from the Bible, I mean, it was stolen by the Bible and inserted as, right, this story, apparently. Right, this is a thing that was in there. I'm pretty sure it was Saul, whenever there was contention with David, right, and there was contention with David, right, he wanted water from this one particular spring where David was at, and his people went and got it, or maybe it was David that went and got it. I'm not altogether sure about the specifics of that. It was a minor episode in the thing, but there was definitely the king wanted water from this one specific fountain, and there was danger involved with it. When the servant brought it, the king drank so much that all his limbs of air filled and all his veins inflated, and he himself became discolored. Now that's not the same. In that one, I believe that the king wound up rejecting the water. His soldiers urged him to mount his horse, but he said he could not. I am heavy, and my head hurts me, and it seems to me as though all my limbs are falling apart. He demanded to be placed in a heated chamber where he could sweat the water out. But when, after a while, they opened the chamber, he lay there as if dead. They summoned the Egyptian and Alexandrian physicians, who at once accused each other of incompetence. Finally, the Alexandrian physicians gave way to the Egyptian physicians, who tore the king into little pieces, ground them into powder, mixed them with their moistening medicines, and put the king back in his heated chamber as before. After some time, they fetched him out again, half dead. When those present saw this, they broke out into lamentation, crying, Alas, the king is dead. The physician said soothingly that he was only sleeping. That has echoes in the New Testament. They then washed him with sweet water, until the juice of the medicine departed from him and mixed him with new substances. Then they put him back in the chamber as before. When they took him out this time, he was really dead. But the physician said, We have killed him that he may become better and stronger in this world after his resurrection on the day of judgment. Again, echoes in the New Testament. And there is a lot in the New Testament that was pulled from other places. The king's relatives, however, considered them mountebanks, took their medicines away from them, and drove them out of the kingdom. They now wanted to bury the corpse, but the Alexandrian physicians, who had heard of these happenings, counseled them against it and said they would revive the king. Though the relatives were mistrustful, they let him have a try. The Alexandrian physicians took the body, ground it to powder a second time, washed it well until nothing of the previous medicines remained, and dried it. Then they took 1 part of sal ammoniac and 2 parts of Alexandrian niter, mixed them with the pulverized corpse, made it into a paste with a little linseed oil, and placed it in a crucible-shaped chamber with holes bored in the bottom. Beneath it, they placed a cream crucible and let the corpse stand so for an hour. Then they heaped fire upon it and melted it, so that the liquid ran into the vessel below. Whereupon the king rose up from death and cried in a loud voice, "Where are my enemies? I shall kill them all if they do not submit to me." All the kings and princes of other countries honored and feared him. And when they wished to see something of his wonders, they put an ounce of well-purified mercury in a crucible and scattered it over it as much as a millet seed of fingernails or hair or of their blood, blew up a light charcoal fire, and let the mercury cool down with these, and found the stone, as I do know. This is an interesting thing. Obviously, it is not a literal account of something that happened in physicality, right? There was, at no point in time, was there a king that died who was ground into pieces 2 separate times and then came back to life. Simply not a thing that happened, right? But you can make things through the process and use these things as allegories. There is kings of animals, there are kings of plants, there are kings of minerals. They are highly subjective to whatever locality and upbringing that you in particular have, but this was probably referring to something. And I want to point this out, right? Sal ammoniac, which is salt of ammonia, and 2 parts of Alexandrian niter, which is an oxidizer, right? Nitrogen made from bat guano mostly. If you mix these in addition with something that is called sulfur, you get something that is called gunpowder. Now, what you have to do in addition to that is mix it with some carbon, right? Give it a good binder, something to burn, and then the oxidizer and the ammonia interact with the sulfur, and it creates a very explosive thing. And it might indeed be that there is a "where are my enemies" on the back side of that. Now, on top of that, I'm going to point out that you would definitely not mix these things with sulfur into a paste. You could mix it with some linseed oil. That would create something for sure. And place it in a crucible-shaped chamber. Beneath it, they place the crucible and let the corpse stand. And then they heap fire on top of it, right? This is not open fire. This is a closed chamber. It is concentrating a liquid, but it is, right, the crucible-shaped chamber with a crucible underneath it to catch the contents as they fall. And putting the fire on top of it is going to be in a pit type situation. So they're not lighting it on fire. That is probably important as well. What I would guess from this recipe right here is that this is most likely Greek fire. This right here is most likely the lost formula for Greek fire. Right? Sal ammoniac, Alexandrian niter. The pulverized corpse may be a type of sulfur. It may be the carbon source, right? And some linseed oil. Linseed oil is a wonderful binder. It works for a lot of things. And if these things are mixed together, they are probably going to catch on fire and stay on fire despite the fact that you put water on them. That is definitely something that probably should be looked into. At some point I may do so, but I am not doing alchemy yet. If you are doing alchemy, I would be very interested to see if you think that I am correct in this guess, right? This is firmly in the realm of speculation. But where are my enemies? I shall kill them all if they do not submit to me. That is saying something. All the princes, kings and princes of other countries honored and feared him. And when they wanted to see something of his wonders, well-purified mercury, right? Millet seed of fingernails or hair or of their blood. Do not do this, right? I am so very emphatic about not doing blood magic in any way, shape, or form. Fingernails count, right? If you are using bodily substances from human beings in magical endeavors, you are doing it wrong. It will reverberate upon you. You will absolutely have negative implications from that. And so this right here, is not going to produce anything, right? The hair or the blood at best is going to give you carbon, which you get from charcoal anyway. Mercury is not going to bind to these things at all, and so there is, as far as I know, no real reason to do this part whatsoever. I could be wrong. I do not do the physical alchemy, right? I am not yet into that part of it, but the other part absolutely makes sense for something. This part, not necessarily. Back to the text. This parable contains the primitive motif of the murder or sacrifice of the king for the purpose of renewing his kingly power and increasing the fertility of the land. That is not what was said. That's not what was said at all. There was the king who died. That was not killing the king. There was the sacrifice where he was turned into powder twice, but that powder was not spread upon the crops or even beneficial for the crops. He was reconstituted twice, once to life and once not to life, and in neither one of those was there an implication that there would be productive crops. Right? There was destruction for the enemies. That is in there, but not that there would be crops. This is an assumption that you are making that is not based upon anything that is contained in this text. That's not to say that it's not true necessarily, but it is definitely not what is relayed in this text at all. Like at all. Like at no point at all does this have anything to do with fertility. Originally, it took the form of killing the old and impotent king. In this tale, the king was afflicted with a dropsy, both real and metaphorical. He suffered from a general plethora and total oedema because he drank too much of the special water. One would be inclined to think that the water closest to his heart, which likened him above all things, was eau de vie, and that he suffered from cirrhosis of the liver. Were it not that the extraction of the moist psyche from the elements was a preoccupation of alchemy long before the distillation of alcohol. I am not altogether clear when the distillation of alcohol began, but I do know that the alcohol was an intrinsic part of the human evolutionary process. We probably would not have survived if there was not alcohol. It has been existent for a very long time. I do not know that we have a firm understanding of when we first got alcohol in general. I mean, alcohol, first off, is an antiseptic. It is good for digestion. It actually helps regulate your blood pressure if you use it in moderation. But besides that, ruined alcohol turns to vinegar. Vinegar is another antiseptic that is used for a wide variety of things, including preserving food. Alcohol has been intrinsic to the human experience. Without alcohol, we probably would not exist. Now, when the distillation began, that I don't know. Right? I'm not even roughly sure. Let's see what the footnote says. There we go. The distillation of alcohol from wine was probably discovered at the beginning of the 12th century. Now, that is making an assumption, right? That is making an assumption that just because it was not written somewheres, that it was not practiced somewheres, and we discussed yesterday that that is not necessarily the case. Many things that were intrinsic to daily life simply were not recorded. You didn't record how to start a fire. You didn't record how to cut down a tree or how to gather grain. I mean, you might talk about the type of tree. You might talk about a specific kind of grain, but not how to harvest them, right? That was something that was so commonplace that it was just something people knew. It wasn't recorded. It may be that alcohol and the distillation of was existent prior to the written records that we have. In addition to that, many of the written records from other places outside of Europe were intentionally hidden, disfigured, and misrepresented, right? India being the prime example. Most of the beliefs that Europe had in the 12th century about that was completely wrong, even up to and including the 19th century. Same problems. Right now we have a better understanding these days than we did in those days. It does not mean we have a full understanding. There are many things recorded in the Hindu lore that is simply overlooked because Well, there's no way that that existed before Christianity, or there's no way that that was there before the Jews, even though it almost certainly was, and almost is pretty close to certain. I mean, this is looking at it with a Eurocentric lens. There is reason to believe that they had at least alcohol in India. There is even reason to believe that they had the distillation of alcohol in India even before the 12th century. I am not positive about the sources or the references, so I'm not going to try and put that out there. But it seems like I remember that as a thing, if not a fact. Right? I'd at least read it somewhere. Anyway, back to the text. The idea was to extract the pneuma, or psyche, or virtue from matter, e.g. from gold, in the form of a volatile or liquid substance, and thereby to mortify the body. This aqua permanens, footnote 36, its equivalent can be translated either as divine water or sulfur water, since this means both. We have talked extensively about how sulfur represents the spirit, and that water is an allegory, even if it is not the best allegory for it, right? For the spirit, right? When I do the electromagnetic manipulations of the spirit, which is what I talk about in this book, it feels like moving water, right? It feels like living water. It is a fountain that never ends. It is constantly, ceaselessly flowing within you. That can be translated or interpreted as the divine water. The sulfur water would be spirit water, right? And so both of these indeed accord with what I believe. Now, I don't like the use of water as the allegory, even though it is kind of the way, because fire is the representative of the change is the spirit. But that is an arbitrary designation that I use. It is not something that they used, and what they used for that in many cases was water. And so when we see it, we should acknowledge that, right? This divine water is in perfect accordance with the things that I described in this book. Sulfur water, same thing. And that would indeed be the aqua permanens, the primal beginning, like it is the foundational creative element, right? The spirit is quite literally every single element in existence at all times. This aqua permanens was then used to revive or reanimate the dead body, and paradoxically to extract the soul again. Footnote 37, for instance, in Allegori Septentium, and know that it is the water which draweth forth which is hidden. Now, I do not disagree that this is a possibility. I do not hold the belief that it is impossible to resuscitate someone. We do it here these days all of the time. We have CPR, and that is one method that we use, but we also have this thing called a defibrillator. If you were unaware, the defibrillator has a chance to correct the fluctuations in the heart. That is the primary thing, but it is also used to restart the heart whenever it doesn't fibrillate, right? Fibrillate is the vasications of the heart when it pumps. When it gets out of sync, you can hit it with the defibrillator and it gets rid of the fib. It defibs the later. And so, I know, that's a joke. So it is a thing that we do. We actually literally use electricity to resuscitate the dead, to reanimate the dead. That is a thing that occurs quite frequently these days. It is not outside of the realm of possibility that once upon a time there was technology in which they could do the same thing. We have, is it the Babylon battery? There is a battery. I cannot remember the source, but it is made out of clay. It has a copper tube, and it was filled with lime or lemon, and it created an electrical current, DC. There is the possibility of changing that into the AC, which you could use to defibrillate, right? It is not outside of the realm of possibility. I do not claim that that was exactly what they were doing with it, right? It is possible that they used it as a light source as well. But they did have a battery. There was the understanding that there was something created from it, even if it was not, right? Benjamin Franklin discovering that you can contain electricity through the key in a kite, right? Again, that is a Eurocentric viewpoint, to assume that because we did it and recorded it, nobody else has ever done it. That is assuming. It is entirely possible that these technologies were existent prior to now. Because we can use it, they could have used it too if they would have had it, right? We lost the technology for a long time, but we rediscovered it, right? We found the archaeological remains of these things, and so it is not outside of the box to assume that it is a possibility. On top of that, I believe in the willful manipulation of the electromagnetic spectrum. I believe that that is a thing that I have used to heal myself, to affect physical change within my own body through the manipulation of these things. And if I can do it, so can someone else. And if I can do it on myself, maybe I can do it to someone else, right? It is not outside of the realm of possibility that you could reanimate the dead. I do not discount the miracles of Jesus. I discount his redemptive efforts, right? I discount the fact that he had to die for you to be redeemed from sin. Not that he healed people, not that he even called people back from life, not even that he came back from life. Those things are possible. They are not necessarily miracles. They can be, right? There's all kinds of reasons why somebody might come back to life. We hold wakes for a reason, even if these days we really don't, right? Back in the day, 100 years ago, before embalming was really a thing, there was a chance you would come back to life. And so people would sit there with you to see if you would wake. Right? And that's why we hold a wake. To see if somebody would wake up, because they might not be dead. That is one of those problems, right? It is entirely possible that the people that Christ called back to life were not dead. There were two of those. Or that he was not. That is assumptions that are placed upon because of the text. There is no real way to determine either way. I do not discount the possibility at all. I discount the fact that he had to be divine to do it. Back to the text. The old body had to die. He was either sacrificed or simply killed, just as the old king had either to die or to offer sacrifice to the gods, much as Pharaoh offered libations to his own statue. Something of the kind was celebrated at the said festival. Moret thinks the said festival was a kind of humanized regicide. That is possible, right? Sacrifice of kings was definitely a thing. Whether it was effective or not is highly subjective. Footnote 38 is a reference to a German book. Water has always played a role at sacrifices as the animating principle. A text from Ed Fu says, I bring thee the vessels with the limbs of the gods, an example, the Nile, that thou mayest drink of them. I refresh my heart that thou mayest rejoice. The water of the Nile was the real consolamentum of Egypt. In the Egyptian fairy tale, Anu was found that the heart of his dead brother, Bata, which Bata had placed in a cedar flower, had turned into a cedar cone. He put it in a vessel of cold water, and the heart soaked it up, and Bata began to live again. Footnote 39. History of consciousness. Here, the water is life-giving, but of the aqua permanens it was said, it kills and vivifies. That would be the spirit, right? Killing things and reviving. Death to the old, birth of the new. The king has numerous connections with water. In the parable of sulfur cited earlier, the king drowns in it with Diana. What? That was not what was said. 40. The king, who is imprisoned in the sea, also belongs in this context. See the text in Paracelsus as a spiritual phenomenon. Right? He drank the water, he didn't drown in it. Right? He drowned because of it, but not in it. That is a big difference. The hieros gamos was often celebrated in water. The motif of drowning also takes the form of an inward drowning, namely dropsy. Mater alchemica is dropsical in its lower limbs. 41. Meyer. The horse's belly is a great secret. Our dropsical patient concealeth himself therein, that he may be restored to health, and may free himself of all water, in turning towards the sun. Okay. Or the king is dropsical and conceals himself in the belly of the horse in order to sweat out the water. 43. So doth the old man sit in the bath, whom keep in a carefully sealed and closed vessel, until the visible miraculous be invisible and hidden. Now this can refer to physical alchemy, right? This can be the allegory for refining mercury. And the horse in that case would be the alembic, right? The alembic is the distillation device. That makes sense, right? Even this dropsicle and the water, the belly of the horse, there was no point in time where a king, a literal human being, went inside of the belly of a horse for pretty much anything. The water appears also as a bath, as in the Dicta Alani, where the old man sits in the bath. 43. Wait, we did that. Okay, well, I don't know. Here, I would recall the King's Bath in Bernardus Trevisanus, which we have discussed earlier. 44. Cf. Supra. Water is used for baptism, immersion, and cleansing. The cleansing of Naaman, 2 Kings, is often cited as an allegory of this. Footnote 45, from the Aurora Consurgens. And to Naaman was it said, Go and wash 7 times in the Jordan, and thou shalt be clean. For there is one baptism for the remission of sins. Then why did you have to do it 7 times? But that number 7, that is an important number. There is definitely some correlations for things that you need to wash in water, and with the Jordan as an allegory, not the physical representation of the actual river. It absolutely makes sense. Right, that flowing, living water that we were talking about, it cleanses. In our parable, the wonderful water already has that decomposing and dissolving property which anticipates the king's dismemberment. Footnote 46. O blessed form of sea water which dissolvest the elements, Tractius aureus. The dissolution of the initial material plays a great role in alchemy as an integral part of the process. Here, I will mention only the unique interpretation of the Solucio given by Dorn. In his Speculativa Philosophia, he discusses the 7 stages of the work. 7. The first stage begins with the study of the philosophers, which is the way to the investigation of the truth. That would be finding the base. But the truth is that from which nothing can be missing, to which nothing can be added, nay more, to which nothing can be opposed. The truth, therefore, is a great strength and an impregnable fortress, an unconquerable pledge to them that possess it. In this citadel is contained the true and undoubted stone and treasure of the philosophers, which is not eaten into by moths, nor dug out by thieves, but remaineth forever, when all things else are dissolved, and is appointed for the ruin of many, but for the salvation of others. Again, that is the allegory for these things. This is the thing most worthless to the vulgar, spurned above all things and hated exceedingly. Yet it is not hateful, but lovable, and to the philosopher precious above gems. It is also important to note that the first step is indeed love and wrath, a function of which is hate. Footnote 47. 47 is from Theatrica Chemicum. In his recapitulation of the first stage, Dorn says, It is the study of the chemist to liberate that unsensual truth. Footnote 48. In Dorn, veritas is synonymous with sapientia, as is shown by the passage that follows in the original text. There, truth says, Come unto me, all ye who seek, which is a slight rephrasing of Ecclesiasticus, Come unto me, all ye who desire me. Knock, and the door shall open. It is the study of the chemist to liberate that unsensual truth from its fetters in things of sense, for through it the heavenly powers are pursued with subtle understanding. Footnote 49. That is in reference to the Philosophica. Knowledge is the sure and undoubted resolution, by experiment, of all opinions concerning the truth. Experiment is manifest demonstration of the truth, and resolution the putting away of doubt. We cannot be resolved of any doubt, save by experiment, and there is no better way to make it than on ourselves. Let us therefore verify what we have said above concerning the truth, beginning with ourselves. We have said above that piety consists in knowledge of ourselves. Footnote 50. Dorn stresses the importance of self-knowledge for the performance of the opus alchemicum in other places as well. For instance, on page 307 he says, Therefore man, heaven and earth are one thing, likewise air and water. If man knows how to transmute things in the greater world, how much more so in the microcosm that is in himself? If he know that the greatest treasure of a man exists within the man, and not outside him. I'm in agreement, right? With the things that I talk about, you can do external things with this, but the primary goal of me relaying this information is for self-discovery and self-improvement. This is an intrinsic part of the process to me. There is no part of separation from the internal reflection. And so knowledge of yourself is the most important thing. The balancing of the 7 virtues and vices requires it. Piety consists in knowledge of ourselves, and hence it is that we make philosophical knowledge begin from this also. But no man can know himself unless he knows what and not who he is. Again, agreed. Footnote 51. Quid non quis ipse sit is an excellent formulation of the personalistic question, who, and of the impersonal and objective, what. Quis refers to the ego, quid to the self. Both of those are the same thing, right? The ego is the part that makes the decisions. There is a conscious and unconscious part of that, the active and inactive, the masculine and the feminine. Both, right? That voice you hear, that is a reflection of the ego. Quid is the self, which is those two parts in union. So, yeah, agreement. I mean, we will not be back here till 58. All right. Not what and not who he is, on whom he depends and on whose he is. For by the law of truth, no one belongs to himself. Agreed. We all belong to the Creator in equal measure. And to what end he was made. Agreed as well. With this knowledge, piety begins, which is concerned with 2 things, namely with the Creator and the creature that is made like unto him. Now, this made like unto him is anthropomorphizing God. That is an assumption that we do not have a foundation for. I understand that it is written in the source that a lot of people use. That does not make it true. That is a guess. It is possible, but it is not a certainty, and to assert it as a certainty is fallacious at best. For it is impossible for the creature to know himself of himself unless he first know his Creator. I agree with that. Oh wait, we're not back till 58. No one can better know the Creator than the workman is known by his work. Later, Dorn says, the chemical putrefaction is compared to the study of the philosophers, because as the philosophers are disposed to knowledge by study, so natural things are disposed by putrefaction to solution. This is compared philosophical knowledge, for as by solution bodies are dissolved, so by knowledge are the doubts of the philosophers resolved. He says in his Physica Trithemi, the first step in the ascent to higher things is the study of faith, for by this is the heart of a man disposed to solution in water. I agree. And finally, in his Philosophia Chemica, Thorne asserts, dissolution is knowledge, or the spagyric union of the male with the female, the latter receiving from him all that ought to be received. This is the beginning of the special generation whereby the effect of our spagyric message is sensually apprehended, namely the union of the twofold seed to form the embryo. I do not disagree with this either. Dorn appears to be onto something. I think that he had some things that he didn't get quite correct, but that is okay. There are things that I am not correct on as well. This is true, right? All 3 of these references are absolutely intrinsic to what I have described. The knowledge of self is primarily important. Yes, you should know God. You know God by your discovery of yourself. That is not to say that God is you, or that you are the first direct representative of God, but you are a representative of God. You can find the commonality between you and other people. That is an expression of God. You can find the commonality between you and animals. That is still an expression of God. You can even find it between yourself and plants, and that is yet again another expression of God. And so by the investigation of the natural world, you can come to an understanding of the divine. That is not to say at any point that any one of those elements are the full representative thereof, up to and including humanity. We make that assumption because of our pride, not necessarily because of actual physical understanding. Back to the text. Right, and this is definitely talking about the union of the opposites, right? Even when it's talking about marriage being sensually apprehended, the union of the twofold seed, that is the same as this dissolution, union of the male with the female. Right? There is a spark of creation that is created whenever those two things create. That spark is vitally important, by the way. It is evident from these statements that Dorn understood the alchemical solutio primarily as a spiritual and moral phenomenon, and only secondarily as a physical one. The first part of the work is a psychic dissolution of doubts and conflicts achieved by self-knowledge, and this is not possible without knowledge of God. The spiritual and moral solutio is conceived as a spagyric marriage, an inner psychic union which by analogy and magic correspondence unites the hostile elements into one stone. By inquiring into the quid, and by spiritual understanding, the selfish hardness of heart caused by original sin is dissolved. The heart turns to water. There was no original sin. That is something that it's assumed by people who were reared in the control system of Judaism or Christianity or even Islam, but that does not make it true. Right? We have discussed quite extensively what the original sin would be, the knowledge, the gaining of knowledge that sin exists. Right? Well, if you didn't know that by disobeying God it was sinful, then disobeying God was not a sin. You have to have knowledge for it to be, right? And so there was no original sin. That is something that is placed upon humanity by the control systems to take away your agency for the choices that you make. The ascent to the higher stages can then begin. Egocentricity is a necessary attribute of consciousness and is also its specific sin. Egocentricity would be pride. 58. 58 says, it is also regarded as the supreme sin. That is because so many other ones stem from it, right? There is links between sins, right? There is this egocentricity, right? That is the desire to bring yourself above other things. And that can be tied to greed as well, right? I am reserving my resources or my time to myself because I am better than you. That is two sins in one, right? That is greed and pride. There is I desire to have sex with everyone that will allow me to, right? Because I am better than other people. That is a tie between lust and pride, right? There can be a tie between any of them, but the most common ties are with pride, right? Pride is the most common denominator for most of the falls. If anything can be asserted as the original sin, it would be pride, not disobedience, but pride. And now disobedience is a function of pride. It is not pride itself, but because you consider yourself above the rules, that would be pride. The problem with the original sin in the Garden of Eden being that is that they didn't have that concept, right? They didn't do that because of that. It was not pride that led to the fall. It was not knowing about it. And that's only if you take Genesis as a literal reference, which you shouldn't. But consciousness is confronted by the objective fact of the unconscious. Often enough, an avenging deluge. Water in all its forms, sea, lake, river, and spring, is one of the commonest typifications of the unconscious, as is also the lunar femininity that is closely associated with water. The dissolution of the heart in water would therefore correspond to the union of the male with the female, and this, in turn, to the union of conscious and unconscious, which is precisely the meaning of the spirigate marriage. 59. The water signifies the sponsa, bride, and delecta, beloved, as well as sapientia. Ecclesiasticus 24:5, where wisdom walked in the bottom of the deep, in the waves of the sea, and, as the love goddess Ishtar praises herself as cedar, cypress, palm tree, rose plant, vine, etc. Again, water is the representative of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the foundational element of all creation. And so, the spirigate marriage is the binding together of the water with the clay, right? You are formed from clay, earth, salt. You are filled with water, the Holy Spirit. That is the marriage. And, I mean, it can be the conscious and unconscious as well, right? The thinking and the non-thinking brought into accordance. Similarly, the citadel or fortress is a feminine symbol containing within it the treasure of the truth, also personified as wisdom. Footnote 60 is from the Philosophicum, where Sapientia holds a long discourse. We will be back at 62. This wisdom corresponds to salt, which is coordinated with the moon. We have discussed quite extensively why that is not true. Now, it can be, right? Wisdom is not given by the salt, but you are the body. You are here in physicality. The understanding that comes from learning can only come through the body. And so, in a way, the referring of wisdom corresponding to salt kind of makes sense, right? You cannot have wisdom as the disincorporated spirit. It is only through the existence that wisdom is acquired. Wisdom is the application of intelligence, which is the things that you learn. And so it is only by the application of the knowledge that you get wisdom. That can correspond with salt because you are salt, physically, in physicality. But it is not the body that is intrinsic to it, right? It is the soul that makes the decisions, that comes to the understandings, that reaches the conclusions. And so it is better represented by air than it is by earth. It is better represented by Mercury than it is by the moon. We dealt with that quite extensively when we went through salt and the moon, so fall back to those if that is confusing. The spagiric union produces an embryo whose equivalents are the homunculus and the lapis. The lapis, of course, is a symbol of self. If, after this glimpse into the psychology of the solutio, we turn back to the Allegoria Merlini, several things will become clear. The king personifies a hypertrophy of the ego, which calls for compensation. He is about to commit an act of violence, a sure sign of his morally defective state. His thirst is due to his boundless concupiscence and egotism. But when he drinks, he is overwhelmed by the water. An example, the unconscious, and medical help becomes necessary. Okay, so there are assumptions being made here that are not necessarily attributed to the text that we read earlier, right? We do not know why he was about to commit the act of violence. It may not have been morally defective. If you are, I would have to go back and read it again in that context, but if you are defending yourself or your people, violence is perfectly acceptable. If you are invading another person, a group, it is not. And so that is definitely up for some debate, right? But it is not a sure sign of moral defectivity to be about to commit an act of violence. You can be about to commit an act of violence in defense of other people. That's not necessarily what was said in the story, but neither was this, right? And his thirst is due to his boundless concupiscence and egotism. Where did you get that from? That is an assumption that you are making completely out of nowhere. When he drinks, he is overwhelmed by the water. It does say that by the unconscious. Well, that is something that is not implied. It is implied that he drowns. It is entirely possible that it is his unconscious, but that is not what it is said. That is an assumption that you are making due to the conclusions you have already drawn. Self-insertion. The two groups of doctors further assist his dissolution by dismemberment and pulverization. Footnote 62. The method of the physicians was an imitation of Typhon's dismemberment of Osiris. Indeed, the king had already begun to drink his fill of Typhon's sea in order to dissolve himself in it. The second version of the Visio Aristotle in Rosarium Philosophica likewise contains a dismemberment into indivisible particles, but there it refers not to the king but to his son. That would be the spirit. His dismemberment takes place in the body of Baya, and thus represents this process of histolysis in the chrysalis state. It is important to remember that the Son, in context, correctly, is the Holy Spirit, not a physical Son, not the incarnation of God, but every single human in existence is a representative of the Logos. And so this is the Father and the Mother into union, becoming the Logos, right? See the divine and the Trinity explained for that part of the procedure. They become the Logos, and the Logos is the Son of the Mother and the Father, not a physical corporeal being, but instead the agent of change. And that agent of change is indeed created from indivisible particles, right? That is, every single element in existence. And while the compounds made from those elements are definitely dissolvable, the primary elements are not. The Holy Spirit is the primary elements, and the various combinations of those, and the space in between those things. And so this absolutely makes sense in the context of my understanding. Confirmation bias acknowledged. Not necessarily in the way that it is portrayed. The original of this may be the dismemberment of Osiris and Dionysus. Footnote 63. Further material in the transformation symbolism in the Mass. The king is subjected to various forms of dissolution, dismemberment, trituration, dissolution in water. Footnote 64. Variants of the latter are: the king immersed or drowning in the sea, the sterile king of the sea, Materia Chemicas dropsy, etc. The motif of the drowned king goes back to Osiris. In the lament of Isis for her son in the daily ritual, she says, "I have crossed the seas to the bounds of the earth, seeking the place where my Lord was. I have traversed Nadit in the night. I have sought him who is in the water. In that night of great affliction, I have found the drowned one of the earth of aforetime." His transfer to the heated chamber is the prototype of the Laconium, sweat bath, of the king, often shown in later illustrations. It is a therapeutic method which we meet again in the American Indian sweat lodge. That is something that I want to have, right? That is one of my goals for life, is to create a sweat lodge. I mean, I don't have the capacity to even begin that at the moment, but it is definitely a goal. The chamber also signifies the grave. The difference between the Egyptian and Alexandrian physicians seems to be that the former moistened the corpse, but the latter dried it, or embalmed and pickled it. The technical error of the Egyptians, therefore, was that they did not separate the conscious from the unconscious sufficiently, whereas the Alexandrians avoided this mistake. 65. Concerning this separation, see the Pomandries vision in the Corpus Hermeticum. "And I beheld a boundless vision. All was changed into a mild and joyous light, and I marveled when I saw it. In a little while darkness settled upon it, fearful and gloomy, and I saw the darkness changing into a watery substance, which was in great turmoil, and belched forth smoke, as if from a fire. And I heard it made an indescribable sound of lamentation, and there came forth from it an inarticulate cry, as it were a cry for light. But from the light there arose above the watery substance a holy word, that one might hear it, a voice, and pure fire, and a spiritual word. The separation of the four elements from the dark chaos then follows. The text is corrupt, so I have translated it literally. Concerning the cry of the drowning king's cry for the help in mire. Oh boy. Do you know what this is? Do you know what this is, Jason? You know what this is. I know what this is. This is the throne room experience. This is the unfolding of creation, right? And a little bit different than my experience of it, but yeah, this is it. I beheld a boundless vision, the void. All was changed into a mild and joyous light, the infinitesimal point, and I marveled when I saw it. And in a little while, darkness settled upon it, fearful and gloomy. Yes, the differentiation, the balance thereof, right? If there is light and the darkness comes in, there is a balance that is stricken. And I saw in the darkness changing into a watery substance, which was in great turmoil, and belched forth smoke, as from a fire. That is in accordance with what I saw in the creation of the world, in the accretion of the elements. This is it. Changing into water, and then fire, and then there was earth. And I heard it made an indescribable sound of lamentation, and there came forth from it an inarticulate cry, as it were, a cry for light. But from the light there arose, above the watery substance, a holy word, that one might hear it, a voice and pure fire, and a spiritual word. I tell you quite often that I have a word, right? I cannot pronounce it. It is unpronounceable. It is a sound more than it is a word. It is really close to the primal sound of the word of creation as recorded in the book of Genesis, and it is remarkably close to the intention behind the word logos. It sounds an awful lot like magnetics, which if you have not heard magnetics expressed audibly, sounds like sounds a little bit like a trumpet sometimes. That is the word, right? I'm stating it plainly where before I've only intimated it. It is not a word that I can give you. It is not a word that I can pronounce for you in a way that is articulate. It is a word that you hear in this point. And not only in this point, right? When I am in a meditative state, this sound reveals itself to me. When I am performing the manipulations of the electromagnetics, this is the sound that I hear. This helps me to align by the discordance becoming concordant, bringing harmony to what is inharmonious through sound by the willful direction of my will of these forces. This is a description of the throne room experience as he experienced it. I do not doubt that Pomandres had the experience from what is written right here. I don't have to hear anything else from him. I don't have to go to this corpus hermeticum. I do not have to read the full context. I can see this as it is described right here, and I can tell you exactly what happened to him. I wrote about it. It's in this book right here. Check it out. Back to the text. At any rate, they succeeded in reviving the king and evidently brought about his rejuvenation. If we examine this medical controversy from the standpoint of an alchemical hermeneutics, many of the allusions can be understood in a deeper sense. I agree. Now, he's probably not correct. I don't think that he actually had the experience, right? I think that that was the major holdup. There is a point of surrender. There is a point where you have to give up self. There is a point where you have to be okay with death. There is a point where you have to be okay with the dissolution of self, and all of that is a very large step. It is something that you're going to have to deal with if you are on this path. If you have not dealt with it yet, you have probably not had the throne room experience. It was only on the other side of that that I achieved it. And if you have not had it, these things are cloudy for you, right? For me, it is not. For me, it is like putting on my glasses and, oh, I can read now, right? For me, it is intrinsic. It is something that just leaps out. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what he is talking about. But I don't think that Jung did it. Just like Nietzsche, I don't think he actually achieved the thing that he was looking for because of that surrender. Right? If you are looking to hold on to this unconscious element, then you are not going to achieve the fullness. It will not happen. If you are clinging to the mortal, it's not going to happen. That's why you're told so many times not to do that. That is why it is so explicit in all of these texts that actually have actual information that you don't cling to this mortal coil. That doesn't mean to give it up. That doesn't mean to despair about it. It means to embrace the possibility of more, because it is more than a possibility. Back to the text. For instance, the Alexandrians, though making just as thorough use of Typhonian technique of dismemberment, avoided the seawater and dried the pulverized corpse, using instead the other constituent of the aqua pontica, namely salt in the form of sal ammoniac, mineral salt or rock salt, also called sal de Arabia, and sal nitre, saltpeter. We discussed those earlier. Footnote 66. That is from Ruland's lexicon. Primarily, the preservative quality of both salts is meant, but secondarily, in the mind of the adepts, marination meant the informing penetration of sapientia, dorns veritas, into the ennoble mass, whereby the corruptible form was changed into an incorruptible and immutable one. Certainly, there is a little trace of this in our somewhat crude parable. Also, the transformation of the king seems to betoken only the primitive renewal of his life force, for the king's first remark after his resuscitation shows that his bellicosity is undiminished. In the later text, however, the end product is never just a strengthening, rejuvenation, or renewal of the initial state, but of a transformation into a higher nature. Agreed. So, we are probably not wrong in attributing a fairly considerable age to this parable. One ground for this assumption is the conflict between the Alexandrian and Egyptian positions, which may hark back to pre-Islamic times, when the old-fashioned magical remedies of the Egyptians still led to skirmishes with the progressive, more scientific medicine of the Greeks. Evidence for this is the technical blunder of the Egyptian method, contamination of conscious and unconscious, which the more highly differentiated consciousness of the Greeks were able to avoid. Alright, that is going to bring us to the end of this particular section. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but I do not apologize for it. I feel like, once again, I have differentiated the points that I needed to differentiate, so I don't have a whole lot of need to expound here. I was not expecting this much truth to come out of this particular chapter. There are definitely things here that I have couched in warnings in other places, so you should be exceedingly careful if you are going to participate in these things. I do recommend the participation. I absolutely do, to anyone who is willing. It requires a great deal of work. And if you would like instructions, I do have an instruction manual. It's not the best, right? I am working on the second edition. It's taking longer because there are other things that are getting added in, right? I am doing dowsing these days. I am working with the earth magnetics. That is a whole new experience for me. I am finding new things, and so the revision is taking a little bit longer than I thought that it would. There is so much more that I need to add to this. But this will get you there, right? All of the primary things that you need to achieve the throne room experience is described in this book. Is it the only way to have that experience? Nope, right? Everything that is in this book came after the throne room experience. So it is not necessary to do the balancing in fullness. It's not. It is recommended. It is much easier on that side of things, but it is not necessarily necessary. The throne room experience can happen to you without your will, right? I was not expecting it when it happened to me. But what is explained in here is that, right? It is the being caught up. It is the taken out of my body into the heavenly realm. It is that. It is hearing the word. It is seeing the things happen. And it was described in here by somebody several thousand years ago, which is impressive to me. I mean, I automatically give more weight to anything that he is going to say on the backside of that, because I know what he went through for that. I know exactly what was required, and he took the steps, or else he could not give us that description. Now, that is with the full understanding that now that you have seen this particular video, now that you have heard me talk about these things, you will be able to describe them in part. I mean, there will be limits placed upon you if you attempt to do this deceptively. I would not, under any circumstance whatsoever, try to be deceptive about your experience in this particular area. It will come out that you are lying to anyone that actually has had the experience. This was not the full relayal of that experience, either by him or by me. There are other parts. And if you don't know those parts, it will become exceedingly clear that you don't know what you're talking about. You are merely parroting someone. See Agrippa. That's where I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of the instruction manual, contacting me directly, or most beneficially today, hit that hype button. It is free for you to use once a day for the channel that you find value in. So if you found value in this video, if you're still here, you probably did. Do me a favor and hit that hype button. It will help more than the like or the share. Please hit that hype button. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.